I think that's really up to my constituents to say how it's gone for them. For me, I've learnt so much in the time. It's an unbelievable amount of stuff that you learn because of the things that are on the order papers in both Keys and Tynwald, but also the things that people bring to you. You just never know what a day's going to hold. It does, it makes it very challenging, but really enjoyable and rewarding at the same time. I think the biggest issue facing everybody, obviously, is Brexit. That's pretty fundamental to our future and what direction we're going in and everything else, which is why I've been pushing for at least a bit more interest in the report from the House of Commons Justice Committee. They reported and they recommended that where our interests are not the same as the UK's interests, then the government in the UK have to take measures to make sure that we have representation that's suitable representation. It's obviously different to theirs. Now, the UK can't make up their mind what is in their best interest at the moment. I'm not sure that the whole population of the Isle of Man has actually been asked what's in their best interests. But in that situation, how can we know that our interests are the same as the UK? And I still believe that we should be going to the UK government and saying, this is what the committee recommended. The government at the day didn't want to abide by that recommendation, but will you revisit it? Can we have some sort of voice in this, because we're affected as much as you? Oh, I was delighted to see them. Absolutely delighted, because I managed to get the legislation for an independent health regulator into the programme for government, but it obviously wasn't a great priority for government in their legislative programme. But of course that's now taken priority because Sir Jonathan Michael has recommended that we do it. I was delighted to see all of his recommendations. I think that the amendment that Mr Peake put forward was fine, except it didn't have a date. And the cynic in me says where there's no date, you have to be very careful and keep an eye on what they're doing, because they can change their mind and say, well, the time isn't right, we're working on it, blah, blah, blah. But if you've got a date that you've got to come back to Tynwald with, that holds the feet to the fire. And I felt that I obviously supported Mr Hooper's amendment because I thought it was the most appropriate and had the most force to it, because it recognised that you needed this cross-government working party. I mean, it's not just one department that has to be involved in this, but it also had a very fixed date, and a date that they had to report back by Tynwald, and a date where they had to complete things. If you miss, it was 2035. If it happened that you didn't meet your targets till 2037, I don't think anybody would be saying you haven't done your job well enough. That's dreadful, provided you have obviously reasons why, but not to have that date. And some of the reasons given were things like, well, we might be able to do it early. Well, I don't think people are going to complain if you can do it earlier. But you need to have a target that you're aiming for. So openness and transparency improvement, I suppose a change again to collective responsibility. It was watered down slightly when Mr Quayle became Chief Minister, but it hasn't gone far enough. I think people are still being forced to vote for things that they don't agree with, which sort of tied in with my suggestion for the programme for government, which was in both my manifesto as an MHK and my manifesto for Chief Minister, and I was the only one to include it in the manifesto for the electorate, with the idea that when you form a government, you form a programme for government, and then the ministers are tied to that, but nobody else, nothing else. So you can have all the numpty ideas coming along and you don't have to vote for them as a minister. Whereas now you have to go with the majority in the Council of Ministers. And that is wrong. If it's not there at the beginning, even if you have to renew it every year and say, right, this is the situation now, this is the programme for government for the next year, and then all buy into it or not. But to be tied into everything, I just think is wrong. If it's not on the agenda to start with, you would think that all the big ticket items you would know at the beginning of the year, and you should be able to get consensus in the Council of Ministers on those. And the smaller issues, if you don't agree, you don't agree.